Okay. People are still trickling in, but thank you for joining us for navigating water quality in the Charles River. We're so excited to have you join us tonight. Okay. I'll keep watching for people joining from the waiting room, but I think we can get started. Again, this is Navigating Water Quality in the Charles River, where we're going to talk about the results of our annual water quality report and its impact on recreation with Lisa Kumpf, our River Science Program Manager, and Cam Salvatore, the paddling enthusiast who paddled the entire length of the Charles River. Before we begin, I will go over a few Zoom meeting norms. I'd ask then that when presenters are speaking, we can stay on mute. And if you have any technical questions, feel free to directly message me in the chat. And also, as we get towards our Q&A session at the end, I invite you to use the raise hand function to ask a question of our panelists tonight. So I can start by doing a little introduction to us. If you don't know us, we are Charles River Watershed Association, or CRWA. We were founded in 1965 by a group of concerned residents who wanted to clean up the Charles. We are one of the oldest watershed organizations in the country, and we have come a long way since the dirty water of the past, and we have a long way to go with our changing climate. We work with EPA, state agencies, and 35 watershed municipalities to build climate resilience, to monitor water quality, to improve the watershed, and implement nature-based solutions. We are an interdisciplinary staff of plus or minus 12 people. And we have 5 program areas: river science, blue cities, climate change adaptation, advocacy, law, and policy. I would like to, at this time, do a land acknowledgement. We humbly acknowledge that our work is carried out across the traditional territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag peoples, and recognize them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this watershed and this land. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists tonight. So presenting tonight, we have Lisa Kumpf, our very own River Science Program Manager, who leads our water quality monitoring and restoration programs, and is a one-woman team just working to protect and preserve the Charles River through science. Cam Salvatore is our other panelist. He's a film director and athlete who holds the record for the first and fastest unsupported single vessel source to the sea navigation of the entire 80 miles of the Charles River. That is always a mouthful for me to get out. And I'm just very grateful to have both of them here tonight. And at this time, I will pass it to Lisa to present about the River Science Program and explain a little bit about what we do to monitor water quality.
Thanks, Julia. That is quite a mouthful. I don't think I could say it myself, honestly. The next slide. Thank you. So as Julia mentioned, one of our main areas at CRWA is our River Science Program, where we really focus on monitoring the water quality of the river in several different ways in order to inform our advocacy. So this includes a lot of volunteer scientists that come together as part of many of our programs. You can see kind of our by the numbers over here. This is for 2021. We had 985 total volunteers help us out in 2021, which includes our cleanup volunteers as well. But a lot of those are also volunteer scientists. So it's really important that we involve all of the community in this so that they can get a better idea of what's going on in their local river. And this data set that we have tracks back to 1995 now. And it has allowed us to track long-term changes in the health of the river over time, and identify problem spots, which has helped with eliminating point source pollution in the past. And now we're really focused on non-point source pollution as well. So you can see this kind of by the numbers. In 2021, we had a significant amount of rain this past year, 35 inches of rainfall, which is more than average. We had 53 sewer overflows into the Charles, and we took 629 water quality samples. I kind of slice and dice it depending on how you want to count a water quality sample. But I think that's like 629 bottles of water essentially, which is pretty cool. And you've got some other numbers down there, and I'll talk next about our sampling programs. So we have four main sampling programs, plus we had a kind of renewed focus this year on combined sewer overflow monitoring. Not direct monitoring for us, but for just keeping track of what sewer overflows were going on. So that comes out of a bill that was passed at the beginning of 2021, the sewage notification bill. And we have worked with MWRA, the city of Cambridge, and the city of Boston to make sure that we are getting notified of all of the combined sewer overflows that go into the Charles when we have extreme precipitation, which happened a lot last year. Our kind of core monitoring program is our volunteer monthly monitoring. That's the one that's been going on since 1995. We have about 80 dedicated volunteers who sample once a month on the river at 35 different sites at 6 a.m. Get up real early. Actually, last Tuesday was our sampling morning. And we sample mainly for E. coli, and then also we sample for nutrient parameters as well as total suspended solids, other things as well, that to make sure that we are keeping track of the health of the river. Other programs that we have a cyanobacteria monitoring program. That's mainly focused on the lower basin of the Charles, where we typically see these toxic algae blooms each summer. And we'll talk a little bit more about these, so I'm just kind of breezing through them now. We have our biological monitoring program, where we have volunteers go out to tributaries, little streams in the watershed, and collect bugs, which can give us a sense of what the water quality is like in those streams, based on the sensitivity of those bugs to pollution. And then we also have our flagging program, which is our water quality notification program, mainly targeted towards boaters on the lower Charles as well.
And at this time, we're going to watch a trailer for the Source to the Sea navigation that Cam made for a presentation last October. And I will just put it on and stop talking because it's a great little video.
So here we are on the Charles River.
Not what you expected, is it? Hi, I'm Cam Salvatore. In August 2020, I set a speed record for the first unsupported source-to-sea navigation of the Charles River.
Still got a ways to go though.
Join me with the Charles River Watershed Association on my chat explaining the 80-mile kayak through Massachusetts, where you'll see parts of the river you've never seen before. We'll speak on environmental issues and dry summer conditions of the river, as well as some technical and surprising revelations on my journey. Hope to see you there.
So those are weavers. First line of wands. Those are all spiders. 36.8 to go. Let's do it. Woo! Oh yeah. Uh-oh.
And at this time, I will pass the mic to Cam so he can speak about his journey.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Julia. So the Charles River navigation project started as kind of a passion project. I've always wanted to go from source to sea on the Charles River. And when I had started doing some research and reaching out to the Charles River Watershed Association, was one of the first groups that I had reached out to, realized there wasn't like a set record, essentially, like a timed front to back record. I understood that, of course, it's probably been done before with its storied history and native peoples living on the river, but it is something I thought was interesting and possibly I could get it on the books. So I kind of haphazardly, as you could see from the trailer, brought myself down the river, starting in Hopkinton all the way down to the Boston Harbor. And I experienced, like, I was seriously surprised by what I saw upriver and all the way down through even areas that I had experienced before. I grew up pretty close to the Charles River. I live very close to it right now. And I was continuously surprised by its beauty. Sometimes the pollution, sometimes the stuff that I would see and not recognize, as far as like what I learned was going to be like invasive species and cyanobacteria blooms and whatnot. But as far as that first run or the recorded run down the Charles River, it was extra fun, extra challenging, and something that I wanted to bring back as a challenge for other people to get involved with, and possibly and hopefully bring greater awareness to these things that I saw in the Charles River, and kind of advocate for other people to kind of join in and see these parts that I had seen as well, and help the Charles River Watershed Association kind of put together these programs that we'll probably talk about a little bit later. And just, spread the awareness of the Charles River for the neighborhoods that are alongside it all the way through Massachusetts. That's kind of the long and short. I think, are we talking about like the moving forward with the navigation project at this point, or we'll get to that at the end? Yeah.
I think we can get to that at the end, but
Okay.
yeah, just to preface, we'll give more details later, but Cam will be redoing his journey this May and asking for competitors to challenge him and take the record. And we will see if that will be the first 2 weeks of May, and we'll see how many competitors we will get.
I've already had a fair bit of outreach of people that want to attempt it, which is great. And I have to say, it will probably easily be smashed this time around. So I'll get back to that later. About my first run, though, it was mostly comprised of kind of a few different runs of research in this upper area between Echo Lake in Hopkinton and the Populatic Pond. This map kind of describes that path with a lot of help from the Charles River Watershed Association map that I received. That period of time that I had done the navigation project in was in 2020, where apparently from Community Corner, I was supposed to stay out of the Charles River. So those headlines are probably true. It was a very, very difficult run due to a lot of factors. The water level was very, very low. There's areas, actually most areas in this map you're looking at currently, there was little to no water flow. And the Charles River as it was at the time. So the points that did have water had very, very, very challenging aspects to it, whether it be invasive species coming up from below, or pieces of refuse that were laid across the river. You saw the boat that was kind of stuck in a dam-like structure. Yeah, it was very, very hard at this section. And throughout the rest of that journey, I found that those water levels and the pollution levels that I saw kind of interesting, and kind of made me wonder about the programs that the Charles River Watershed Association had to offer as far as their flagging. And it made me want to know a little bit more. as far as a recreationalist on the river. I know I was introduced as an athlete, but I'm hardly an athlete or a scientist. I just am very, very interested in the Charles River itself. And yeah, I feel like this is a fantastic opportunity for me right now to kind of pick Lisa's brain about some of the stuff that I had seen on this stretch. Like first off, this image on the right, I had seen recently, actually. You can still see a little bit of the snow on the ground, but I was really kind of curious of these like kind of small alien looking seed pods. Like there's a couple of snail shells in there, but there are these seed pods, yeah, that Julia's indicating right now. And I was super curious. They look like they're straight out of a science fiction movie. And I was kind of like, so I had to snap a picture and just kind of like ask somebody. And Lisa is probably the perfect person to ask. I mean, like, what exactly are these things?
Yeah, so those are actually the seed pods of water chestnut plants that are super spiky. So I'm hoping you didn't hurt yourself on them. But they are an invasive species that propagates all over different parts of the Charles River. And we have some really dedicated volunteers who try to remove these invasive species from the river every year by hand pulling them out. And it's been a very long process. We are seeing a reduction in the amount of water chestnut species or water chestnut plants each year, but it's been like a 10 years long effort and really requires a lot of management to keep these out. So you can see, and I'm not sure where exactly you took this picture, Cam, but they are everywhere. They transport really easily.
Yeah, so I think this image was actually taken when I was out doing a bit of research with Robert doing the dams. I want to say it's like just below, is it Box Pond Dam? I want to say it's just below Box Pond. And that's probably represented on that map, I believe, previously, but it's like on the very upper part of the Charles River. So yeah, that's super interesting. So yeah, I learned about water chestnuts actually via the Watershed Association, but I had no idea what they actually looked like, or how to be able to identify them, right? I think that is super useful information. Do you ever like receive photos, or is there a way for people to kind of like shoot the Watershed Association a line to be able to like tell you that like, hey, this is happening over here, this is spotted here, kind of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of keep our inquiries open. You can always call our office number. And we also have kind of a form on our website that folks can fill out. That's actually how we got notified last year of a large fish kill that happened in the Medfield and Natick portions of the river. That was really just folks who were noticing something that was not right going on, and that alerted us to get Mass DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, and the local towns involved as well.
Do you take those kind of like calls or anything for bikes found in the river? Or any kind of like the larger
good
refuge
question.
or something like that?
Yeah, we get those a lot of time if there's some large trash, or sometimes there's like large wood in the river. Usually we'll direct people towards their local DPW or Department of Public Works, who really is the ones who have the equipment to remove things like that. In terms of large woody debris, we usually say if there's like a log in the river, unless it is, blocking all flow and causing flooding upstream of it, it's actually a good thing for the river to keep some wood in there. It provides a lot of habitat for a lot of different creatures.
That's super interesting. I know like at the upper parts of the river, there are a ton of those, not like full blockages, of course, but like I was describing before, there's just like what's the word for it? Gosh, I'm blanking on this word. Like obstructions, right? So there's like a lot of obstructions on the river, not necessarily dams, but and not necessarily bikes, but a little mostly just like down trees or something like that. It's so that's good to know. I think earlier in one of our previous talks, somebody had asked a similar question about whether or not those should be called. So it's great to get some clarification from the association about those.
Yeah, and I see that Ralph has his hand open. Ralph, do you want to ask your question?
I just, as a 25-year veteran of the Run the Charles, and still avid paddler, I'm impressed with what you did, because it's, I've done that stretch from Millistown probably hundreds of times, and there are what we call strainers, which are, if the water is too high, those logs will sort of strain you out of whatever boat you're in, and they can be, and so that's the thing, that low water can be a problem, but just be careful when you go out again. The higher water, as you know, can be. But just for the people, what's always been interesting to me is back in the late 1800s, the Waltham Lakes part was home to over 5,000 canoes in 15 or 16 boathouses, and it was like a huge play. I mean, the biggest canoe racing and canoe probably using spot in the country. And then, highways got built and so on and so forth. But and there was also a similar big enclave of boathouses in West Roxbury along the river. So it has an interesting history of people getting out and using it. But it's you tell a really good tale of multiple rivers, where it's very narrow, and there are faster ways to go down the river once it gets a little wider than.
Yeah, certainly. And it's absolutely true. It's nearly indistinguishable at its source, right? As the Charles River, the one that we kind of like recognize so clearly in the Lakes District, in the lower basins, right? It's super interesting. And I kind of want to bring that awareness to people, right? Like, that's an interesting bit of history about the boating. I had no idea it was that popular in Lakes District in West Roxbury.
Yeah. Well, the Newton, we can talk offline, but I mean, the Newton Historical Society has had a whole exhibit on that a few years ago. And then I don't know where you'd find it for West Roxbury. I've just seen a lot of pictures of it, but just thousands of people would use it every summer. So
yeah, it's incredible. I suppose I can speak a little bit more on, sorry, Lisa, you're up.
That's okay. We'll go back and forth, Cam. So just to orient everyone, one of the major concerns of pollution in the Charles River is, in addition to the kind of visible things that Cam has just been describing, is an invisible one, and this is stormwater runoff. So mainly what we're concerned about right now, because a lot of cleanup has happened in the river over the past decades, mainly due to the enforcement of the Clean Water Act. Now our largest source of pollution to the river comes from stormwater runoff, which is really just rain that is falling on, the urban areas, the suburban areas around our river in the whole watershed, which is 300 square miles. So you can think about what volume of rain that would be. And washing off of our streets, our roofs, our cars, and bringing with it all of the pollution that is found there. So the main concern, one of the very big main concerns for us is phosphorus, which is a nutrient. It is a limiting nutrient in this ecosystem, in the aquatic ecosystem. So that just means that it is the thing that controls whether we have balance in our ecosystem or whether our ecosystem is off balance. And in the Charles, as well as most of the rivers around the Northeast, in urban areas especially, we have too much phosphorus, too much nutrients. And that causes the river ecosystem to be off balance.
So Lisa,
Yeah.
I take my dog around the neighborhood like every single morning, right? And in Watertown, and I pass by this house like that has a little bit of water running every single day. Like I snapped a picture of it, not to put them on blast, but just to ask you about this. Like there's something kind of, you can see in the picture on the right, as we're going over, there's like a little bit of like growth coming out of this water, almost like it's like born right out of the water flow. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like,
yeah, on a really micro scale, yeah. We're thinking about the whole watershed, which is 300 square miles, but on a micro scale, this little storm drain that you can see on the picture on the left, all of your neighbor's water is running into, it's bringing pollution with it. And if there's too much phosphorus, too much excess nutrients in there, it can grow things like this little, algae, some type of algae that's growing here on the right. So yes, on a micro scale, that's absolutely what we're talking about.
I mean, so like what happened, like when that water goes, that's going right into the Charles River?
Exactly.
Okay. So,
yep, that's
I mean,
not treated. There's nothing from that storm drain that water is going into. It will go into pipes. Sometimes those pipes will pick up sewage from, areas around it underground. If there's, bad infrastructure or old infrastructure, if the pipes are leaky, and then that goes right into the Charles.
I mean, their lawn is very green for like, what is it? It's mid-April now, but I honestly don't feel like that's worth it.
Yep, possible that they're using fertilizers, probably probable, and that's just contributing to the excess nutrient problem. So now that we kind of know some of the sources of those, I will say fertilizers from lawns is definitely a source. In our watershed, it also includes a lot of urban sources. So phosphorus comes like out of your tailpipe in your car if you have it idling on a parking lot or on the side of the street. And that phosphorus kind of sticks to the pavement until the next water or the next rainstorm comes and washes it down into those storm drains. We also have a lot of phosphorus that comes from leaves. So normally when leaves fall in a forest, they go to the forest floor and devolve into soil over many years or degrade. And that soil filters the nutrients out of, or it basically becomes the dirt, right? And that becomes a source of nutrients for whatever grows in it. But when you have leaves that just go directly into the river, which in some communities we definitely have, if folks, have their lawns that back up to the river, they might just blow their leaves into there. That all degrades in the river instead, and then causes there to be excess nutrients in the river. So we took a look at some of our water samples from last year. We took 40 total phosphorus samples and 40 total nitrogen samples at 12 of our sampling sites during 4 times in a year. And we can see some of the results. So we use an action limit that's taken from an EPA report that has basically analyzed water quality all over the Northeast US. And that action limit says that they're basically, it gives a number and says that's the 25th percentile of all of the samples in the Northeast region. And in our river, for total phosphorus, 98% of our samples are greater than that 25th percentile number. And for total nitrogen, 95% of our samples are greater than that 25th percentile number, which we kind of use as an action limit because we'd like to see the river restored to a lower phosphorus level. So that's a pretty striking percentage. And it kind of gives you an idea of how severe this issue is.
Wow. So what's the percentage level that you're trying to hit again?
Yeah, it's not super well defined for sure. And I know Ralph can speak to this very well as some other folks, but we are trying to just reduce the amount of phosphorus and nutrient pollution so that the ecosystem is in balance. And so some of the next slides that we'll go through kind of are symptoms of that off balance state that we have, or sometimes called eutrophication in a river or a pond. And right now we have this crazy off balance eutrophied state in our river. So yeah, Cam, what does this mean for recreation? What do you think?
I can tell you, well, I'm not exactly sure what the definition, the word that you just used, eutrophication.
It just means the ecosystem is off balance.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, is that is this off balance state why there's like huge growths in some large like stretches of the river? I mean, because
Yeah.
I feel like that's a direct impact on recreation, at least as far as the navigation project goes. There were several areas in the river, I think, two off the top of my head, Milford Pond, and there's Cow Pond in Dedham or West Roxbury, that are just like, there was water there. I'd been there since after, the drought in 2020 and whatnot. And there's plenty of water, but there's just this growth underneath that kind of like suspends the boat a little bit. It's almost like boating through, you're just like kind of resting on plants versus being buoyant in the water. So, I mean, I feel like that is, you get your paddle kind of caught up in that stuff. That would be I think like kind of a direct impact of just like the channel, like not being, it's essentially cutting off parts of the river that could be enjoyed or could be connected from one end to another. It'll make somebody just kind of turn around and go back kind of situation.
Yeah, definitely.
I think, the drought, the water levels are of course an issue as far as recreation. It makes it like less accessible in the same way that some of these growths would. But I also feel like maybe going back, as far as water quality goes, I used to swim in the Charles around the Needham area. I know I was not aware of any of the flagging programs or anything like that. Like I probably shouldn't have gone at some points in time, but I did anyways. I know that I encountered a lot of people jumping into the river in 2020. So I feel like that just the awareness in general of knowing like, when these events are happening and they're just recording these events and sharing this news could definitely impact kind of the way people view the river in general and recreate on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so invasive species is what you're talking about mainly, that excess plant growth because there's so many extra nutrients. So of course the nutrients, are there for all different plant species that, native species that grow in the river too. But the thing about invasive species is that they are just really good at thriving and overtaking the habitat from those native species, and they spread like wildfire. So this is a picture of water chestnut that we were talking about earlier. Those little seed pods are kind of found on the underside of this rosette that floats on the surface of the water. So we have a lot of water chestnuts. We have a lot of milfoil and fanwort, which are kind of like, your typical pond weeds, I guess you would call them if you were swimming, as well as other invasive species. And mainly where these species grow is in areas of the river where there's slower water. So behind dams a lot of the time, because this is it's usually a problem in lakes and ponds. The reason it's a problem in our river is because we have these slower areas in shallower areas, which is often behind dams as well. And in areas where the water can get really warm, which is kind of those shallower areas, especially during quite warm summers, like in 2020, we had less water, as you mentioned, in the river. And that also allows, the sunlight to get closer to the bed and allows these plants to grow even more.
That's super interesting. So that spiky little like alien looking thing hangs off the bottom of those?
Yeah, that's right. So it's kind of right under the base of the middle of that rosette. And
Oh,
when we're
interesting.
pulling these out of the river, we have to be careful because they're pretty spiky. They can hurt you.
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting.
Yep, until they fall, and then they spread and they germinate in the soil for next season. So some of the issues with invasive species, in addition to, being a problem for recreation, as we've mentioned, they are reducing the biodiversity. They don't allow the native species to grow as much. They limit habitat space for other types of fish and different bugs and things like that, if they're kind of creating just like a monotone habitat instead of having like lots of different micro habitats within a river environment. They outcompete native plants and impair the water quality in general. Because when they die, that just becomes excess matter, basically, that goes down and has to degrade and often becomes its own, leaf problem, essentially, in the river.
That's it. Yeah, from the nature documentaries that I watch, it's because the reason that they can thrive too is because they don't have like anything that eats them yet, because nothing has identified them as food or anything, right? Or is it
right?
Just
Yeah, I mean, a lot of invasive species don't have like natural predators, I guess is what you're getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, so what's the best practice for people who are recreating on the Charles River? Is it just flagging this and letting people know like what's happening and where?
Yeah, there's several approaches to management of these issues. So one of the main things that we focus on at CRWA is kind of that large scale watershed management. So because we know this problem is exacerbated by those excess nutrients, we try to reduce those at their source before they get into the river, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But then we also are there are programs, or there are like treatments for these invasive species. So I mentioned we hand pull water chestnuts with a great group of volunteers in the Lakes District around Waltham and Newton and Weston. And then we also are working with the Department of Conservation and Recreation to deploy herbicides in some of the most heavily recreated areas in the lower basin, where milfoil, the kind of pondweed type thing, is a big issue. And we're doing that in concert with them in a really kind of safe way, making sure we use the lowest dose that's going to be effective, and the types of herbicides that have been proven to be safe for the water quality, other than the plants as well.
That's really interesting. And I mean, I think I spoke a little bit on maybe some of the areas where the water chestnuts are high, or getting through those areas, and like paddling around invasive species is a bit challenging, or maybe even it's happening and you don't even know it. I imagine that most of the boaters and whatnot run with a very limited understanding for, like myself, what's around them, like scientifically at the time. I mean, I think one of the bigger ones that's kind of on my radar now after the navigation project would be cyanobacteria. I think that maybe it's not an invasive species. Is it an invasive species? It is?
It's not.
Oh, okay. Well, it still kind of seems like it may be an issue.
Yes.
It definitely is one of the things that got put on my radar, like, hey, watch out for this cyanobacteria bloom. It's happening in this place. I want to say it was flagged in the Lakes District, I imagine. I can't recall off the top of my head, yep. But I might be skipping around in the presentation at the moment. I apologize. I couldn't wait to hear the cyanobacteria part,
Yeah, so cyanobacteria is a natural bacteria that grows in all lakes and rivers, but it becomes an issue when it is in very high concentrations. And so this becomes an issue when you have excess nutrients and you have a hot summer and hot, warm water for them to thrive in. So that's certainly where the conditions that happened in 2020 when we had the longest cyanobacteria bloom that was ever recorded in the lower basin of the Charles River, mainly between the BU Bridge and down to the locks at near the Zachem Bridge. And then we also did observe a minor cyanobacteria bloom in the Lakes District region as well. So the reason that this becomes an issue when those cyanobacteria are in such high concentrations, they actually produce toxins themselves. That's just kind of part of their anatomy. And as they produce those toxins, if they are ingested or contacted by humans or pets, they can become toxic. Some of them have liver toxins, some have neurotoxins, and we have observed like dog deaths from those if dogs are swimming in the water or licking their fur after they've been swimming. And then sometimes with humans, they can get rashes if they have contact with the water. And there's even some research going on around how these toxins might go into the air if there is enough concentration of the cyanobacteria around, and that can become a problem kind of over a lifetime if folks are exposed to that for a long time in their life. So last summer in 2021, you can see we took 53 cyanobacteria samples. We sample at 3 different locations once a week between about mid-June and September or October, depending on how long the blooms are going on. And in 2020, I mentioned we had a very big drought, but in 2021, we actually had kind of the opposite situation. We had frequent rainfall. And so this graph, I kind of love our field coordinator created this after his observation. So you can see the green line is like the concentration essentially of cyanobacteria that we measure. It's in a pigment called phycocyanin that the bacteria naturally have in them. You can see it going up and down, and then the blue lines are rainstorms. So the more rain, the longer the line is there. And so what this graph is kind of showing is we had at the beginning of the summer kind of a peak. We actually observed visually cyanobacteria. It looked like a bloom. We notified the Department of Public Health. And then the next day we had a big rainstorm and the concentrations went way down and we could no longer see the cyanobacteria. So that kind of pattern happened several times last summer. So that's just because, when we get a big rainstorm, we get a big flush of water. It kind of stirs up those pools that are warm and hot that the cyanobacteria love to thrive in and washes them downstream. So last summer, we didn't actually end up having an official cyanobacteria bloom in the lower basin at all. But they generally do happen every summer. They've happened, I think it's like 10 of the past 12 years in the lower basin.
Yeah, wow. So I know when I was paddling, I got some recommendations for how to kind of manage myself in cyanobacteria blooms, one of which was just stay out of the Charles River, which at that point in time, it was pretty much the only opportunity I would be able to have to complete this navigation project. So, I mean, ideally, you would stay away from the river, of course, right? Or is there a different kind of ideal to kind of stay safe from these kinds of things?
So I think it's important to know where exactly they're affecting. So the river is 80 miles long, as you've mentioned, has several different types of areas. Most of the river the water is flowing. And so that generally is not a good environment for cyanobacteria to grow and into these blooms. So in those areas, it's usually not a concern. Where it can be a concern is in those kind of stagnant areas, likely behind dams. And that is also where a lot of recreation goes on. Think about the lagoons in the Esplanade. That's a really intense area for cyanobacteria because that water is sitting there and it's getting warm and those cyanobacteria love it. So there's really different environments. So that's one thing. And I think you also want to be aware of where these are. Usually your local Department of Public Health, your local Board of Health has lists of where these are happening each year. They're often more communicated when they're in swimming beaches or other kind of designated recreational ponds in areas. And then the Department of Public Health for the state of Massachusetts also has a long list of where these blooms are identified every summer that they update frequently. So we can provide that website too, where you can find that information.
Yeah, I know that'd be super helpful in the upcoming weeks when I'm preparing to do this navigation project. I'd love to be able to make that information available to other people who are trying to participate as well. I think that it's this report in general would be really helpful for people that are interested in the project and for, anybody that's close to the Charles, which is a ton of people. So I'm looking forward to having a look through. I think you might have answered this question already, but is that kind of what we need to read into? Where can we go to get that information other than kind of your local Board of Health? Is there any other place? Can I reach out to the Watershed Association? Would a place like companies like Paddle Boston, would they have that information ready?
Yeah, good question. So CRWA has a program that is really designed to notify boaters, especially on the Lower Charles River, where most of the boating does happen, although I know people paddle along the whole length of it. It is a good indicator of when the river is safe for boating or not safe for boating. And that's called our flagging program. We have partnerships with 12 boathouses along this part of the river. And basically they fly blue flags on days where boating conditions are suitable and red flags where there are potential health risks. So there are 3 factors that we bring into this. One of them is E. coli bacteria. So that's kind of your most traditional type of bacteria that honestly we know the most about, and we have regulations around in the state of Massachusetts and the United States. And we have like really good idea of what the thresholds are for like if it's safe to boat or safe to swim in. Generally, this goes with rainfall patterns. So in general, we see that we have blue flags when there hasn't been rainfall in the past 24 to 48 hours, and red flags when we do have rainfall in the past 24 to 48 hours. The other 2 things that our flagging program takes into account are combined sewer overflows that I mentioned before. Since we do have good notifications now of when and where those happen, we fly red flags for the areas that might be affected for those for 48 hours after they happen. And cyanobacteria blooms. So in areas, I mentioned in 2020, the main bloom was happening between the BU Bridge and down to the locks. You can see that's kind of just the lower part of the river in this map you see here. That is also taken into account, and we would fly red flags at boathouses that were affected by the cyanobacteria blooms throughout the length of the bloom. So this is another place you can go to our website to get information about it. We also have a Twitter bot now that you can see it tweets out, I think every 6 hours, what the conditions are and say if it's safe or not to go boating.
That's super helpful. That's really neat. Oh, wow. Yeah, this picture. I mean, I took this image of the meter here. I want to say it was just below, actually, it was right next to that bicycle picture. So it was probably right near the 495, where 495 crosses Charles River. Gosh, I don't know what town it was in. I want to say it was still Hopkinton at this point. But yeah, I mean, this was from 2020, and, again, like water levels were extremely low. Is that something, this year, and I understand in 2021, we got rain, but is that something like we can expect like, how do you guys expect these trends to go, essentially?
Yeah,
Is that-
so we're definitely seeing the impacts of climate change on the Charles River already. So one big thing is temperature, of course. That's the easiest thing to think about with climate change. We are definitely seeing an increase in temperature over time in our river, in our water temperature measurements that we've taken since 1995. We also, oh yes, this is a graph of that right here. I kind of averaged all of the water temperatures from the whole river throughout the 12 months of the year when we sample it, and you can see the trend over time is an increase. And that's in degrees Celsius, so that's like a 1.5 degree increase over, you know, a 25-year period. So that is a pretty significant rate, honestly. And then the other major factor that we think about with climate change is precipitation. So in general, in the Northeast, we are seeing a huge increase in the amount of precipitation that we're getting. And that is mainly also happening in really intense storms. So that can set off things like CSOs a lot easier. And of course, bring all of that stormwater runoff with the pollution into the river. So it's kind of hard to think about, but in ways that precipitation pattern towards more intense storms makes it a little flashier. So we've got like a lot of rain coming down at once, and then time periods when we have not as much rain. And so that's what happened in 2020. We had a time period when there was not as much rain and we got a drought. And because we don't have natural kind of groundwater that percolates around the river as much, because we have this highly urban environment, that makes it so that when we have drought conditions, it can be more of a problem for communities that get their drinking water sources from wells, mainly in the upper watershed. And then of course, you know, it has low stream flow. So that's bad for ecology of the river because creatures can't live where there is no water. Yeah, so did you, I mean, you saw the drought impact, but have you seen any of these other impacts? Or maybe we should move along because I think we're getting low on time here. Yeah.
I mean, I think you kind of summed it up. Like I saw, it's nice to be able to like kind of hear that from you and be able to like kind of look back and say like, I am seeing these things, but without that kind of information, right? Without like looking at this this report, I think like I would probably still be blissfully ignorant about those kind of impacts. Like you're saying, that like big rush of water is easy to mistake as everything's kind of fine and the drought's fine. But it also, to my surprise, like I'm learning that it makes water quality more poor for recreating as well. So it's kind of this double-edged sword. And I didn't realize that that was happening. So it's great to have this information to actually be able to like kind of recognize these things on the river. So, you know, the impacts I might not have recognized at first, I'm going to keep my eye out for.
Awesome. And then the question that kind of naturally follows this is, what do we do about all of this, right? We've identified these sources of pollution, we've measured them, we've seen the impacts on recreation. What are we doing about them? And that really is the main work of CRWA. We measure the water quality in order to do the work to improve it and be more resilient towards these issues with climate change in the future. So a primary way of that we do that is try to incorporate these nature-based solutions into the whole watershed. So we know that the water quality is dependent on all of the land around the river, not just the river itself. So one of the main things that we work on is incorporating green stormwater infrastructure like rain gardens or bioswales into city streets and people's lawns to filter out that pollution and return water to the groundwater wherever possible. And this really is not only good for, you know, taking that excess nutrients out of the water before it gets into the river, but also can reduce flooding risks, which are issues with those really flashy storms that we get with climate change. It provides habitat for bugs and other pollinators and builds biodiversity, and places green spaces in places that might otherwise be covered with pavement in urban areas. We also work to remove these invasive species, as we've mentioned, and restore these native habitats for wildlife. And a lot of our work is in advocacy. So land conservation is one of the best ways that we can preserve these natural habitats and preserve a more natural hydrology of the river that is resilient when we are talking about these impacts with climate change.
Can I ask, before you go to the next slide, Julia, what is that like contraption in the furthermost right picture, that kind of Ghostbuster looking backpack? What is that?
Yeah, it does look like Ghostbusters. This was actually from an electrofishing survey that we joined with the Department of, or the Division of Marine Fisheries last summer on one of the brooks in the watershed. So it's actually like a little electricity generating backpack. And they have kind of a wand that goes into the water, puts a little shock out to kind of stun the fish temporarily in order to count them and identify them before they're released back, just so that we can do an assessment of the what fish are in the streams, how they're thriving or not, what type of biodiversity we have within the fish population.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm also kind of curious. Like I personally don't have the ability to conserve land on the Charles River. But is there something like that I can, what can I do, right? Like is there people that I can reach out to? Is there like, what kind of awareness can I bring as like a normal dude?
Yeah.
Or you know, like how can I help? How do I spread this kind of awareness to people?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, talking about it and engaging in conversation at your kind of neighbor to neighbor level is a really important way that we do this. That's also one of the main goals of our volunteer programs, is to get people really involved, and so that they can be kind of ambassadors for the river throughout their watershed. On a more kind of practical level, if you are a homeowner, you can stop some of the pollution at the source. As we talked about, using lawn fertilizers is really not great. We also want to make sure that people are conserving water. So in cases, not just during a drought, but in between droughts as well, it really makes our groundwater source more resilient so that we can better sustain those droughts. You can also volunteer with us. As we mentioned, we have a lot of those volunteer opportunities. If you're interested in education, we have a River Ambassador program where we go out, or volunteers go out and are at kind of neighborhood events that are going on and teach others about the watershed and how it works. We have advocacy volunteer programs as well, our River Advocate program, where you can learn about how to do that advocacy at the town level with your local conservation commission. So go to our volunteer page, and there are a lot of places to go and chip in. Also, our education page on our website is full of these resources as well. We even have like a build your own rain garden in your lawn booklet that's really helpful to identify where you want to put it, how big it should be, and what types of plants you would want to plant in it.
That's super cool. I mean, do you guys have like Groupons?
We do not have Groupons.
I feel like, I mean, I'm an odd person, obviously, but I feel like that could be like something like just putting waders on and going like picking plants in the river. I think that'd be pretty cool. I'd like to get my friends involved with that. So, yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think even just speaking with you about this, and like originally it was, and like kind of sharing it around, it was brought to my attention that, you know, this like the floral industry might be interested in that information as well. And like how they might be able to change their practices or putting their money in places that support like not so much fertilizer being used or something, like just the connection of just like talking about it, I think with people brings up unsuspected results where, it didn't occur to me that, this industry might be interested, and it's a big industry as well. So just talking about it, I think, is another great solution as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'd like to transition to a question and answer session with Lisa and Cam. So if you are interested, I invite you now to raise your hand and ask a question, and then unmute yourself when I call on you, and we can just keep the discussion going. And if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand and saying your question aloud, you can also put it in the chat and I will read those out.
Looks like there was one in the chat already from Yushin. Sorry if I missed this, but which parameters determine the recreational blue versus red flags in the Lower Charles? Yeah, so it's a combination of E. coli bacteria. We have actually predictive models that use rainfall data and stream gauge data, which incidentally Ralph put in the chat as well, to predict what the E. coli levels are going to be, if they're going to be safe for boating or not safe for boating. So that's one parameter. And then if there are combined sewer overflows, that's another thing. And then if there are cyanobacteria blooms, that's the third thing.
I'm just seeing this comment from Ralph about the real-time stream gauges on the Charles. That's interesting bit of information. I'm looking into that pretty much straight away, so I can, prepare a little bit better. I think that's great info.
There are, I can't remember how many, there are probably, 6 on the length, maybe 5, Lisa, I can't remember off the top of my head.
There's 3 on the main stem, but then there's a few on the tributaries.
Yeah. But this new version of them you can look at time periods compared to last year, long-term median, and I look at it all the time just to get an idea of what the conditions are like in the river, and you start to kind of make mental measurements when it's at a certain level. You can get through certain areas and stuff like that. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, I'll definitely be taking notes from that in the future.
Yeah, regarding drought too, if you guys are interested in that, we're looking at starting kind of a get more eyes on the river type drought monitoring program. So if you're interested, we're probably going to be having a training or putting out materials around that later this summer. So sign up for our volunteer alerts newsletter, and you'll get information about that as well.
Do we have any other questions for Lisa and Cam?
Cam, I want to know what your kind of most outstanding memory of your journey was.
Most outstanding memory. Oh boy. There's a lot of them. It's hard to categorize it. Like it's hard to prioritize it, I think. Rate them, I guess. I want to say like of course, like finishing the project was very, I was elated and exhausted. So that of course was pretty excellent. And like the first evening when I'm on the Charles River sleeping, getting eaten by mosquitoes, that was a low, but still, like in retrospect, a pretty amazing point. Just a hurdle to jump over, right? Something that definitely sticks with me as like a little bit of a gut check moment. What else? I mean, just the amount of research going into the project initially and going through Milford Pond the first time was extremely challenging. but yeah, there's lots of all the spiders underneath Route 16 tunnel. That was that was interesting. But yeah, it's hard to categorize them, but lots of good moments for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun bringing people onto the project as well in the future. Coming up, I definitely want to encourage people to, oh, sorry, learn more. Nope. Okay, I'm skipping ahead. I apologize. If you want to get involved, please reach out to me or the Watershed Association. There's going to be some information about participating coming out in the future, as well as a talk about the kind of gear I used in the initial project coming up next week. Is that next week? All right. Yeah, lots of interesting, kind of technical conversation about how to keep your boat light and how to stay nimble and mobile in that kind of water, which the top picture is actually a great drought pick from right underneath the Cochrane Dam in Dover Needham line.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, please stay in touch with me, stay in touch with the Watershed Association, please, as much as possible.
Yeah, to give further context, the Charles River Navigation Project competition will be happening in the first 2 weeks of May. Competitors will have those 2 weeks to compete with Cam's record, which I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was 80 hours for completing it. And this is including the time that Cam spent sleeping in his kayak along the river. It was an unsupported full leg of a journey. He camped along the way and ate with a little camp stove and packed really light and just slept out beside the river to accomplish this. And you can compete in the project, but for those of us like myself who are not capable of paddling 80 miles in the river and portaging, pushing, and paddling through it all, there's a lot of other ways that you can get involved. Simply sharing Cam's story, and through that sharing the story of our organization, CRWA, is a really great way to expand the reach of this project and get more people involved with the concerns of the Charles River and ways to improve it. And there's also, we're looking for sponsors, and specifically we're looking for the donation of some sort of trophy to award at the end to celebrate the achievement that is paddling a source to the sea navigation of our river. And as always, you can always give to CRWA directly. But as we lead up to it, we have a couple exciting things to reveal. Like Cam said, next week you can join us back on Zoom virtually at 7 p.m. Thursday, April 21st, I believe. We will be having the gear talk, which will go through the nuts and bolts of what you need to do to get through this journey. Then we will be having, you can follow along through our social media and also potentially YouTube and on our website about how the competitors are doing. We're going to get live updates from the field and see what's going on and do a campaign around that. So be sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter to stay in touch with everything happening with the NAV project. And yeah, just thank you all for joining tonight. And we really hope you had a wonderful time learning about water quality and the intersection with recreation and navigation. I think we have a couple more slides that I can go through now. We mentioned throughout that Cam relied heavily on CRWA's very own canoe and kayak guide. We have it available. I believe it is $12 or a suggested donation of your choice to get your own canoe and kayak guide. It has very detailed information about the legs of the river that you can travel. Cam, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Must-have resource for paddling the Charles, just in general. Honestly, it would improve anybody's experience, whether they're doing just a small stretch or trying the navigation project from start to finish. It's information about portages, which will unlock stretches that you didn't think were possible that are relatively easy to portage, right? Again, just must have, super easy to get, and seriously recommend it to anybody who's interested in the Charles River in general.
And then finally, we have links that you can find all the information at. So I did send it in the chat, the navigation project homepage, which will be where everything related is posted, including where to sign up and challenge Cam for his journey. You can also reach out to Lisa and Cam directly if you have further questions if you think of them tomorrow or at any point. And then finally, I'll be sharing in our newsletter, the River Current, updates on the project and how it's going. So please subscribe. And thank you all so much for attending.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Nice to see everyone here. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you all. I hope you have a great night.